Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 4 of The Familiar of Zero. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, the conflict has escalated, Saito has found that at this academy there is an abundance of cute women, many of whom have an interest in him. The trouble is, Louise is a jealous master, and, she's liable to just, beat him senseless. Much to, really, everyone's chagrin. And, really, if that weren't enough, the stinger at the end of the episode informed us that the maid, Siesta, is going to be getting into some degree of trouble. And, naturally, given that we know Saito generally sort of disregards propriety and the general rules and customs of the society, it's safe to say that even if it is above board, he's going to interfere. And if that weren't enough, there is also the matter of a thief. A thief who has an interest in magical valuables, particularly the Staff of Destruction. And it's nice to see that the groundwork is being laid this early on, because the Staff of Destruction in particular, as far as magic relics go, that is one that I think is perhaps the most interesting bit of world building that the Familiar of Zero does, Without giving the game away here, the Staff of Destruction is not what we're led to believe it is, and its true nature is what's really interesting and remarkable about not only it, but the world as a whole. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken, detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. So here we go. Given the title of the episode, it seems we will be focusing on the maid, but the prospect of a thief, that's a neat little side plot we can squirrel away for later when it becomes truly relevant. However, despite whatever plight Siesta faces, the most important thing right now is that Saito is forced to do laundry, and not just any laundry, but he's handling silk garments, which he was explicitly instructed to be very gentle with. Saito doesn't seem to be particularly disposed to doing laundry, and, however careful he thinks he should be, he's likely not going to do it properly. Siesta's helping him out, which, that's nice. She never really has a reason to help him other than just a sort of general kindred, but I don't know. Saito would be wise to watch out for her, just because, a relationship with a maid like this is liable to cause trouble, even if he is something of a folk hero among them. Wait, whoa. Siesta just made the claim with a straight face that Saito never complains about anything. And, that's just not true. The other things are true, that he stands up to the aristocrats and that he is courageous and brave and all that. That's all true, but that he never complains. It's Alright, are we playing to the back row here? Like, what's the deal? Now that said, not everything is too terrible. You know, Saito might complain about some things, but he certainly has no cause to complain about this. Although that said, oh, we're following up on the swords, I suppose. I guess I had assumed Kirsch had already just given him the sword, but, it seems like she is only now doing so, and it's also predicated upon inviting him inside for a little talk here. Now, I think it's safe to say that talking is not what Kirsch has in mind here, especially seeing as how they're sitting beside one another on her bed, and that, you know, she's just outright declaring that the sword is a token of love. Saito has made perhaps a mistake by, asking a question here. You know, why me, he asks. And Kirsch is sort of dancing around the topic, but I feel like it really is, in all truth, because it would really just stick it to Louise. You know, there's no bigger reason beyond that. It is interesting that her, I guess, aristocratic sensibilities were enough to sort of, irritate Saito to the point of foregoing the sword. You know, that's nice in its own sort of way. You know, he's not doing this out of loyalty for Louise or anything, but it's more pride, I guess. Which, you know, should he redirect this towards a more useful avenue, it would be a good thing. Unfortunately, denying her advances has really only just sort of made Kirsch then more determined to cause trouble. And lo and behold, you know, wouldn't Louise show up at exactly the wrong time to get the wrong idea? You know, she would never show up just in time for Saito to say, I don't want anything to do with you, but she would show up just in time to see Kirsch straddling him. Now, you know, Saito could swing this to his favor too, you know, saying like, hey, you know, I could get the sword for free, like, surely they could sell it back and, you know, win Louise back some of her hard-earned money that she spent, like, I guess Saito's not exactly tactful enough to come up with something like that, nor is Louise, you know, she seems to favor corporal punishment to thinking a little bit. Ooh, okay. So Saito, unfortunately, has caused enough trouble that Louise is forcing him to wait outside with the other familiars until class ends. I guess that answers an earlier question, because I was wondering where on earth everything else could possibly be. Yeah, I suppose this is kind of what Saito deserves, when you get down to it, because, like, he had a nice thing going, hanging out with the other humans, but, well, if you're gonna act up, then I guess you have to hang with the animals, you know? Now, I guess as always, Saito has a good relationship with the cook and the staff. It's nice that they save him leftovers, you know? It kind of reminds me about when I worked at a restaurant. Like, we would get leftovers sometimes, not out of the goodness of the boss's heart or anything, but I guess because otherwise it would go to waste, you know? And that's not to say I didn't appreciate it, I certainly did. But, I don't know, there's something about that where it's like, yeah, you know, here you go, leftovers. I guess from Saito's perspective, it's certainly better than he would get otherwise. Now, it is interesting that the cook is the one to break the news to him here, that Siesta is not necessarily quitting, but that she's been, I don't know what you would say, purloined by Count Mott. You know, for a count, someone who's part of the royal court, like, I mean, obviously there's the official story, but, you know, the sword here, Derflinger, I believe he was called, you know, the sword knows what's up. And that's like a little something we're getting to know here and there in little bits, that the sword is, very worldly, I guess, is the best way to put it. What the sword lacks in book knowledge by virtue of being unable to read, it just has a wide breadth of experience, and it's using this experience to sort of give Saito a little bit of advice here and there. Now this is interesting. Saito would go to Gish for a little help. It's interesting in many ways, because if anything, Gish would be, I guess, understandably reticent to help Saito after that whole dueling business, but I feel like there's a very easy way that Saito could sort of swing Gish to his perspective. Essentially, if you couch it in terms of like, hey, there's this cute girl, she's doing stuff she doesn't want to do, we need to help her. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I assumed Gish would go with him to play up like a sort of gallant aristocrat angle, but rather than that, he just gave directions. So this is, bad in a different kind of way. Saito is acting totally without sanction, without Louise, without Gish, without anyone to rein in his excesses, so naturally, things are gonna get messy. It's never a good thing when you, just sort of thoughtlessly waylay an aristocrat, Because, at least Gish, the worst thing he could really do is duel you, but with a count, someone with a title, I feel like they hold a fair bit more sway over the law and how it's enforced. I mean, case in point, guards meet Saito at the gate, and, they're likely, none too happy to see an intruder. Or perhaps conversely, they are very happy to see an intruder because, it's not every day they get to, use their weapons practically. So unfortunately, it seems as though the magic sword was right on the money here with why Siesta was brought to the home of the Count. He does indeed intend to take a mistress, which, I mean, it ain't a good thing per se, but I feel like to some degree that sort of thing is kind of unavoidable. Now, perhaps understandably, the Count is rather dismissive of Saito. It makes sense when you get down to it, because Saito is, a peasant and a familiar, so he's sort of like, not much in the way of social standing. And unfortunately, Saito's just general tactlessness is, probably not gonna help matters, He's just sort of clumsily saying, like, hey, you're taking her as a mistress, she was a maid at the academy, what's the deal here? And I guess this is the other thing, being the mistress of a count is probably better than not being the mistress of a count, if you had to make the choice, Unfortunately, Saito doesn't see it that way. And indeed, that's sort of a simplification, but, it seems as though things are a bit messy here. The Count is a mage, we've seen that. The guards are also armed with polearms, and Saito has brought, nothing. Not so much as his magic sword, so really, if things come to blows here, it's not gonna be good. More to the point, I feel like, such a thing would have wider ramifications. We're given to understand that Louise's family is noble and somewhat important, and she's sort of like the black sheep of the family as the third daughter, and not very good at magic, so, more disgrace heaped upon her would probably be bad. Now, fortunately, the Count has, touched on a little thing that might, help everyone out here. Because he's interested in arcane knowledge, or so he claims, and the arcane knowledge in question is none other than that heirloom book that Kirsch offered before. She offered it to Saito, and he turned her down, which may come back to bite him in the fundament. So, it's one of those things where Kirsch is willing to hand it over if it would mean, having a shot at Saito to snub Louise. But if Saito makes it clear he actually does want it, then, that sort of shifts the dynamics, and, knowing that Saito is now desperate, she's probably unwilling to give it without at least, a blank check of a favor, And undoubtedly Saito would grant that, much to his detriment and Louise's detriment. So, perhaps tactlessly, he's just sort of gotten right to the matter. You know, hey, you've got that book, you know, would you mind giving it to me? So Kirsch makes mention that it's intended as a dowry, and that, you know, men tend to like this thing. So I guess it makes sense why the Count would want it, but, you know, as I had assumed, Kirsch is saying, like, look, if you want this, you gotta date me. It's interesting that Saito would snap like that, like all aristocrats are scum. You know, maybe that's taking it a bit too far, but his interactions haven't been all that great so far. I mean, sure, Kirsch is being self-interested and she's trying to stick it to Louise in one fell swoop, but I wouldn't say that's scummy behavior, you know, not to the same degree as the Count. So ultimately, Saito has decided, you know, negotiating didn't work, he can't really find the things to bargain for Siesta, so now it's time to do things the hard way. Unfortunately, to that end, he has stolen a horse and he's brought Kirsch's sword, which, you know, Derflinger seems to indicate that it's a stupid, useless ornament, and, you know, it's certainly valued for its appearance, but as a weapon, I think it's reasonable to doubt its efficacy. Oh dear indeed. So, presumably it's still the middle of the night with Kirsch waking up Louise and saying, hey, we gotta find your stupid familiar. Now, the odds are good that things are gonna get real bad real quickly, you know? Because I feel like Saito going to the Count's estate unarmed, like, that's one thing. That's probably grounds for severe punishment, but to show up again armed, like, that's probably grounds for execution. So, things aren't good. But let it be known that the sword mentioned that his partner wouldn't last long this time, which indicates there have been partners before, indicative of other human familiars. So that's like a little tidbit for later, I suppose. So perhaps graciously, the guards haven't killed Saito on sight, but I don't know. He might not be long for this world. I guess the Count is sort of hoping for a bit of fun about things, rather than just, you know, having Saito killed immediately, but I don't know. That strikes me of entrapment. However, I don't think anyone's really going to come to Saito's defense beyond Louise and the others. Now, I guess there we have it. You know, Kirsch sort of confirms it, that if things spiral out of control, it's on Louise too, which her family would no doubt not appreciate. So, I guess the question is, given that things are already this bad, with Saito having drawn his sword, I guess the question is, how bad will things get? I mean, we have a little hint here with Saito having drawn the sword with no additional effect. You know, the familiar runes and all that, like, none of it's kicking in, which really does indicate to me that the sword is more of a decorative piece than an actual weapon. I guess it's very unfortunate for him, because he's not even fighting someone martially inclined, he's fighting a wizard, and one who is seemingly pretty powerful. It is also interesting that despite her lack of magical ability, Louise was able to sort of shield Saito simply by failing to cast a spell and causing an explosion. It is nice that the arrival of more aristocrats has sort of calmed everything down. You know, of course the Count is saying, like, look, you know, I'm going to request severe punishment for you guys, which, you know, is fair, but I feel like he's well within his rights to do a whole lot more than that. So the question is, only one person can really come to the rescue here, and that's Kirsch. So the question is, will she do it, you know? And it seems as though she is certainly willing to do so. You know, it seemed like she was going to solve the problem one way or another, digging into her clothes like that, but that she had the foresight to bring the book along with her, you know. I guess there are even some things she's not willing to do, even if she is willing to give up an heirloom like that. You know, it's interesting that Kirsch says she doesn't need the heirloom. That's an interesting way of describing an heirloom, you know? Because, like, no one strictly does need an heirloom, but I feel like you should want to keep it. Ooh. Okay, so it's a dirty magazine, you know? Interesting. Something from Earth. And I guess it's sort of interesting that it's a 1975 issue, which, you know, I guess that does make it an heirloom. You know, it's old and passed down from generation to generation. You know, it does seem like a silly little one-off joke, but that is sort of a recurring theme. You know, things from Earth coming to this world. Now, unfortunately for Saito, despite sort of saving the day, saving the maid, things have gotten a little bit more complicated because she has shown a fair bit of physical gratitude, which naturally will only complicate things further. I mean, he should consider himself lucky that Louise didn't bear witness to that, otherwise the beating would be much more severe than it likely will be already. Because, you know, despite merely insisting that he be quiet, things are gonna get pretty bad in short order, I reckon. I guess when you get down to it, what Saito's done now is pretty much the worst thing he's ever done. You know, teasing Louise is one thing, but causing a diplomatic incident is quite another. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.